This week on the Horsepower Monster, we're going big. Big cubic inches, a big old blower, and a physically huge engine stuffed into a tiny little car because, hey, we're all about overkill. About a year ago, we worked with the wizards at Prestige Motorsports on a similar blown LS build that, incidentally, was going into an airboat. That was a 427 LS with an 871 Roots blower. When we put it on the dyno, it made 797 foot-pounds of torque and was up to 853 horsepower at just under 10 pounds of boost when we stopped the pull at 6,000 RPM. Now, if you're interested in seeing more of that build, I'll leave a link to it in the description below this video. But I thought that would make a really cool baseline for today's build. Again, we're with Prestige Motorsports in Concord, North Carolina. They're doing a 427 LS, and again, it's also got a blower on it, so it's the same size, and within a couple degrees, it's the same cam duration. But this time, we're going with a big hog 1071 blower from Blower Drive Service. But just real quickly, I did want to let you know about our latest offering in the store. If you want a hint, the usual Horsepower Monster logo is on the breast, but instead of the usual green and red, it's Hemi orange. That's because this is our God Bless Hemi t-shirt. Our best video we've ever done is a 426 Hemi, and this is based on that. So if you love horsepower, or you love Hemis, or you just want to help support us at the Horsepower Monster, pick one of these up for yourself. Hey, we really appreciate it, and now we'll get back to the video and find out just how much blower size is really worth. As usual here on the Horsepower Monster, we like to start with the bare block and show you every detail the builder will allow. Here, the Dart SHP LS Next block has been cleaned and painted after being blueprinted in the machine shop, and Prestige's short block specialist, Cody McCleary, begins the pre-fitting process by grinding the ring gaps. The standard deck block has been bored and honed for a set of 4-inch 125 thousandths pistons. And now that the bores are set, Cody can gap each ring to its specific bore. Blowers not only make more power, they also help the engine produce more heat. So the ring gaps are opened up to 30 thousandths for the top rings and 32 thousandths for the seconds. Also, as part of the pre-fitting process, Cody measures all 8 of the forged DSS racing pistons we'll be using, just to confirm that everything is correct. Along with the 4 1/8 of an inch diameter, these forgings have a 22 cc dish to help keep compression down, a 1-inch 115 thousandths compression height, which means we'll have to run a support rail for the oil ring, and a set of 927 thousandths diameter pins with a hefty 200 thousandths wall thickness to minimize the chance of flex when the boost gets ramped up. Next, Cody sets the bearing clearances for the rods and mains. For the connecting rods, the bearings are a set of King's XP race bearings, which are harder than a standard street bearing. They're going into 8 of Eagle's ESP H-beam connecting rods. These are 6 inches 125 thousandths long and capable of handling tons of power. Eagle says that each rod is heat treated, x-rayed, sonic tested, magnafluxed, fully machined along the body, and then shot peened to relieve any stress risers in the steel. That's a lot going on and some serious stuff. The crankshaft is also from Eagle. This is a long arm forging with 4 inches of stroke and a 2-inch 100 thousandths rod journal. This is basically an LS3 build, so the crank has been outfitted with a 58 tooth reluctor wheel. Cody also checks the main bearing clearance. One of the features of Dart's LS Next block design is it uses conventional 4-bolt main caps. Dart says this helps alleviate the windage and oil control problems that comes from the factory LS's separated crankcase bays. Regardless, we found the billet steel main caps are plenty strong, and we also like the priority main oiling system. With all the clearances confirmed, Cody can begin putting together the rotating assembly. He begins by lubricating all the piston pin bores, as well as the bushed little end of the Eagle connecting rods. The pins are locked in place with spiral locks, and Cody also goes ahead and installs the 1.2 millimeter ring set into the piston's ring lands. Once the main bearings are covered in assembly lube, the crankshaft can be lowered gently into place. Cody then adds more lube to the top side of the crank journals and begins dropping on the main caps. As you can see, the center 3 caps have splayed outer bolts to help tie the block together. With extreme pressure lube on the threads, the main caps are torqued to 70 foot-pounds. After the crankshaft is locked in and in-play confirmed, Cody moves on to the rods and pistons. A light coat of motor oil on the piston skirts and the rings, as well as the cylinder bores themselves, will help prevent the rings from scuffing the bores when the engine is first fired up. And then, each piston and rod assembly is carefully slid home. The rod caps are held in place with ARP's super high strength 2000 series cap screws. They are torqued to 75 foot-pounds with moly lube on the threads. Although we're just running a stroke of 4 inches flat, Dark says the block is capable of handling a stroke as long as 4 inches 100 thousandths right out of the box. Now let's move on to the heads and valve train. The camshaft is a hydraulic roller ground by comp cams. At 50 thousandths tappet lift, it has 243 degrees of duration on the intakes and 258 for the exhausts. And that's with the 116 degrees of separation and 110 degree intake centerline. Lobe lift is 367 thousandths for both the intakes and the exhausts. So, with the LS 1.7-to-1 ratio rocker arms, that means gross valve lift will be 624 thousandths of an inch. Connecting the cam to the crankshaft is a timing set from SA Gear, and in front of that is a Melling high-volume, high-flow oil pump. To make your life easier, the LS Next block will accept the stock LS front and rear covers, but lead engine assembler Larry Broker did have to install a special thinner front seal. That's so it'll fit with the beefier hub on the damper we'll be installing here in just a bit. The damper is from Innovators West, and we'll be bolting the blower pulley to it. You can see that it's been cut for 2 keyways to handle the extra stress of spinning the supercharger. The center hub is also thicker than usual to keep it from breaking from all that extra torque it'll be subjected to. That's why the seal that we just showed you is thinner. Notice that Larry leaves the bolts on the front cover loose so that you can actually wiggle the cover a bit. This allows the front cover to move a bit so it automatically centers around the damper hub once it's installed. The head gaskets are multi-layer steel units. Here, Larry installs a set of ARP head studs in preparation for the cylinder heads. A stock LS has 15 head bolts per side, which is okay for naturally aspirated applications, but that limited number of connectors can become a problem if you're pushing in the boost. Since we don't want cylinder heads doing anything except staying securely planted to the block, we're using a setup that utilizes an extra 8 fasteners for a total of 23 per head. But before we bolt the heads down, we've got to get the lifters in. These are a set of 16 hydraulic rollers from Gatorman. Larry lubes up all the lifter bores for the 842 thousandths diameter lifters and then drops them in, giving each roller one final check before sending them home. Then, to keep the lifters from spinning in the bores, Larry installs these composite lifter guides that capture the lifters. These are a little nicer than the stock lifter trays and bolt right down to the block. Simple enough. Now, with that out of the way, we're ready to get back to the cylinder heads. Prestige has their own, Really sweet, if we're being honest, LS3 casting. And if you've watched some of our other LS builds we've done with Prestige, you've probably already seen them in action. Anyhow, these aluminum castings are fully CNC cut. The combustion chambers are sized at 69 cc's each and outfitted with a 2-inch 165 thousandths stainless steel intake valve and a 1-inch 590 thousandths Inconel exhaust valve. Given that chamber size and our bore and stroke, the compression ratio works out to 9.48 to 1. Also, you can see some of the additional head studs used in this build to help clamp the heads to the block. These actually thread into the cylinder head first and then insert into holes in the block, which I'll show you in just a second. Larry gently positions the heads on the block, being very careful not to scratch the deck of the aluminum block with any of the head studs. Here, you can see the nut on the stud that extends down into the block from the cylinder head. It's accessed through the same window you can use to reach the lifters. From this angle, you can see the intake ports have been worked by hand a bit to better match the runner entry from the intake manifold. The intake ports are sized at 255 cc's. They might be a touch bigger after the port matching work, but not by much. The nested valve springs are installed at 1.78 inches with a set of steel retainers keeping them in place. Max valve lift before these springs go into coil bind is 700 thousandths of an inch, which is just within our 624 thousandths gross valve lift. Larry torques the head studs in sequence, spiraling from the center of the cylinder head outward. There are 3 different stud sizes used in this setup. The big 7/16 inch studs are pulled to 90 foot-pounds, while the 3/8 go to 55, and the smallest 8mm studs are pulled to 28 foot-pounds. The rocker arms are from SBI. They're basically a stock rocker with a 1.7 to 1 ratio, but they have been upgraded with higher quality trunnion bearings. Since this is an LS3 cylinder head, the intakes are offset to make room for the push rods, so they'll stay out of the way of the high-flowing intake ports. Oh, by the way, we're using 8-inch 150 thousandths long push rods to activate the rockers. And once everything is in place, the rocker arms are torqued to 25 foot-pounds. The valley cover is from ICT. It seals to the block with a large O-ring, which Larry installs here. The ICT cover also has provisions to delete the stock LS's displacement on demand system, but the Dart LS Next block isn't set up for cylinder deactivation anyway, so we didn't bother with that. Now we're finally ready to get to what you're here for anyway, installing the big 1071 Roots blower. This is the intake manifold for the setup from Blower Drive Service, or BDS. The guys at Prestige have already rounded out the transition from the plenum to the intake runners to help smooth out the airflow a bit. But as you can see, it's been left rough. That helps tumble the air and fuel that flows next to the metal and reduces boundary layer stagnation. But those aren't the only modifications to the lower intake. Some of the bolt holes on the intake flanges that secure the intake to the cylinder heads are actually too close to the runner walls for the head bolts to seat squarely. Plus, they are a tiny 6mm bolt size. That's fine for lightweight manifolds in a naturally aspirated application, but maybe a bit small for what we're doing. So the guys at Prestige drilled and tapped new holes in both heads that accept larger 5/16 inch bolts, and they're farther away from the intake ports. Then they drilled new holes in the intake manifold flange to match. Larry plugs the original bolt holes with button head cap screws so they won't get in the way. We're just about ready to drop on the intake manifold, But first, we need a set of gaskets to provide a dependable seal. Larry glues these Felpro gaskets to the heads so they can't shift around. But the ports are much larger than our gaskets, so once the glue is dry and Larry can confirm the gaskets won't shift on him, he trims the lower portion to perfectly match the ports. And then an extra coat of silicone is just extra insurance against leaks. Now the intake casting is lowered into position and the larger bolts threaded into the new holes in the cylinder heads. Here you can see how the original intake mounting holes were extremely close to the runner walls, and the new positions allow room for the heads of the bolts to sit flush and securely hold the intake and the blower in place. There are also provisions at the back of the plenum for a backfire valve plate. In the event of a backfire, the plate pushes against the springs and opens up to allow the pressure in the plenum to vent to atmosphere instead of damaging the blower. Larry sets the appropriate spring pressure according to BDS's recommendations, and it's good to go. The mid plate or plenum top is a big chunk of CNC milled aluminum. O-rings provide the seal on both sides, and as you can see, that opening leaves plenty of room for the big 1071 blower to push air into those runners. After bolting up the Motion Raceworks billet valve covers, Larry installs the big water-to-air intercooler block. While the blower and the manifold are both from BDS, Prestige chose this intercooler from a company called the Blower Shop. The polished aluminum case is cut from billet aluminum and stuffed with a 16 fin per inch cooler. Plus, it's ready for abuse because the Blower Shop pressure tests every unit to 100 pounds per square inch. With this shot from the front, you can see the 3/4 inch MPT fittings for water. On the back, there are also more options for routing the cooling water. The Blower Shop says in their own testing, this intercooler can drop the inlet temperature 75 degrees or more. And here is a look at the business end of our moneymaker. BDS's 1071 blower is a work of art with a billet aluminum case and helical rotors for greater efficiency. The rotors are also hard anodized for greater longevity and corrosion protection. As you can see, the big billet case is also polished for a great look. And sitting way up there on top of the intercooler, it is really going to make a statement. Once the blower case is secured to the intercooler, Larry bolts on the drive hub and adds a little assembly grease to the drive gears to protect them during startup and break-in. Then the front snout is also bolted up. Now we've got to get the blower spun up. Larry has already mapped out the drive setup and modified this spacer so that it properly locates the crankshaft drive pulley that's mounted to the end of the Innovator's West damper. Then Larry chooses from several belts Prestige keeps in stock to find the correct length. The tensioner clamps around the blower snout and its position is manually set. Up top, we'll be running a dual carb setup. First up comes this gasket, which, interestingly, includes a screen just to ensure that no big chunks of debris gets ingested into the blower. And then next up comes a spacer plate. Now, carb spacers can be incredibly useful in naturally aspirated applications to help increase signal at the carburetor's boosters. This isn't as important here in our blower application, but the spacers are also mandatory to help move the carb linkages up. Otherwise, they'll hit the case and limit throttle movement. The carburetors are a pair from Quick Fuel, which is essentially just Hollies from their still relatively new Brawler lineup. they have an incredible value without scrimping on anything you need in a performance carburetor. For instance, these two 850 CFM double pumpers are set up for blower applications from the factory, and they feature billet metering blocks and throttle bodies, and they even have glass sight bowls, down leg boosters, and four-corner idle adjustments, among other things. But what isn't exactly easy is putting together the throttle linkage for the dual carb setup. Honestly, there's a lot going on here, and it took Larry a bit to get it exactly right, but once he did, it was actually pretty sweet. Sort of like this. Notice now we're fully bolted down and all plumbed up for a little dyno time. Here comes the fun part. For the record, we're burning 93 octane pump gas for all the pulls, so we're not getting all extreme with race fuel or anything like that. There will be a constant flow of cool water running through the intercooler, and it's water right out of the tap, so it's not run across ice or otherwise chilled. The base timing is set at 32 degrees before top dead center, and during the pull, we'll be pulling out 1 degree of timing for every pound of boost as it ramps up. By the way, timing controls are handled with an MSD LS series ignition controller, which is all wired up but just sitting on the tool shelf behind the dyno cart. After break-in and a quick inspection, we are ready to start making pulls. Enough talk. It's time to enjoy some blower wine. For this pull, we are at a 1-to-1 blower pulley ratio, meaning both the crank pulley and the blower pulley are the same size. Still, output is more than respectable. On a pull from 3,500 to 6,300 RPM, we hit peaks of 777.1 foot-pounds of torque at 4,900 RPM and 878.4 horsepower at 6,300. The power was still climbing, but the guys at Prestige had already decided that 63 would be the red line. Oh, and the 427 LS did all that with the big blower only generating a maximum of 9.2 pounds of boost. Boost, by the way, is the green line here, and the scale for it is on the right-hand side of the chart. So, you know what comes next. Since we didn't have any detonation problems with pump gas and 9 pounds of atmosphere, obviously, we need to see what we can do with more boost. So, off came the big 51 tooth upper pulley to be replaced by a smaller 45 tooth unit. Now the blower will be a bit overdriven to spin faster and make more boost. Thankfully, the process is as simple as knocking off the old upper pulley, bolting on the smaller unit, and then resetting the tensioner. And by the way, every time I do a video with a cogged belt blower, I get tons of comments telling me the belt's gonna fly off or the tensioner needs to be tighter, and on and on. So let me just say it now. Cogged belts aren't like serpentine belts. Because they have those big lateral ribs, they don't slip, and they need to be relatively loose or else it shortens their lifespan. And too tight means they're chewing up horsepower the whole time they're on the motor. So, just saying. Time for pull number 2. Man, I love boost. With the smaller pulley, we gain boost pressure throughout the pull with an average of about 3 pounds gain. But boy, did it make a difference. Remember, we're still on pump gas, but we gained an astounding 46 foot-pounds of torque to get to 823.1 and 37.5 horsepower to knock out 915.9. Plus, from across the pull from 3,500 to 6,300 RPM, the average is improved by 41.4 foot-pounds of torque and 38.9 horsepower. Scary power, y'all. I don't know what all they're planning to do to brace up the chassis on the Volkswagen thing this LS Beast is going into, but if the tires are ever able to hook up, that's more than enough power to taco this show car in a hurry. Hey, thanks for watching, and check out these other great videos we've got for you. See you next time.